My mother forged my signature and sold the apartment my dead father gave me to pay for my stepbrother's college. I sued her for fraud. And now she's serving 3 years in prison, while her husband files for divorce after I revealed her infidelity. I'm 29 years old, I work as a freelance graphic designer, and honestly, I need to tell this story because what my mother did to me 2 years ago still keeps me up at night. You know, one of those things that wakes you up at 3 in the morning and you wonder how someone who supposedly loves you can do something like that to you. The thing is, my relationship with my mom, Linda, was always complicated, but I never thought it would get to the point of committing fraud against me, forging my signature and selling an apartment my dad had given me. Sounds like something out of a cheap novel. I know, but it happened, and I guess I should start from the beginning, so it all makes sense. My parents got divorced when I was 8 years old, I think, or maybe I had just turned 9. I'm not entirely sure. What I do remember perfectly is that I stayed living with my mom because back then, I don't know, that's just how things normally worked. Girls went with mom and dads, paid child support, and saw their kids on weekends. My dad, Robert, was an amazing guy. He worked at a logistics company and always treated me like I was the most important thing in the world. But my mom convinced the judge it was better for me to be with her because, mothers always win in those situations. The first few years after the divorce weren't that terrible. I mean, I missed my dad every day, but my mom at least paid some attention to me. She took me to school, helped me with homework, those basic things a mother is supposed to do. Everything changed when she met Michael. I was like 10 years old when this guy showed up, a construction contractor who's 53 now, but back then was in his early 40s, and my mom fell madly in love, or so it seemed. At first, Michael was nice to me. He'd buy me ice cream and ask me how school went. But when she got pregnant with my half-brother Daniel, I basically stopped existing to her. It's like she suddenly forgot she had a daughter. All her conversations were about the baby. All her shopping was for the baby. All her energy went into preparing the baby's room. And look, I understand a new child requires attention. I'm not stupid. But I literally went from being her daughter to being like an uncomfortable tenant in her house. I remember once, I was like 12 years old, I came home crying from school because some girls had been bullying me all day, and my mom didn't even look up from Daniel's crib. She just said something like, "Oh, Emma, don't bother me now, the baby's sleeping." And I stood there in her bedroom doorway thinking, seriously? You're not even going to ask me what happened. The following years were basically more of the same. Daniel grew up and became the center of my mom's universe, and I kept becoming invisible. Michael was decent to me, honestly. He treated me fine and all, but it's not like he was my dad or anything. And I'd spend weekends with my real dad. And those were the only moments when I felt like a person who mattered. My dad would always ask me how things were at mom's house, and I'd tell him fine because I didn't want to cause problems. But I think he knew something wasn't quite right. He just didn't know how bad it was. When I turned 17, something happened that basically destroyed whatever respect I might still have had for my mother. It was a Saturday afternoon and I was supposed to be at a friend's house studying for a math exam. But my friend got sick, so I came home early. Like 2 hours earlier than planned. I came in through the back door because we always left it unlocked, and I heard weird noises coming from the guest room. You know what I mean? And I thought maybe Michael and my mom were, well, So I was going to go straight to my room to not be awkward, but something made me stop. The thing is, Michael was working that day. I knew, because I'd seen him leave in the morning with his truck full of tools. I stood there in the hallway like an idiot, with my heart beating super fast. And at that moment, my mom came out of the guest room with a guy who definitely wasn't Michael, a guy younger than her, with his hair all messed up and buttoning his shirt. And when she saw me, her face went white as a sheet. I don't know what I expected her to say. Maybe an explanation? An apology? Something. But what she did was worse. She looked me straight in the eyes and told me, "This isn't what it looks like, Emma." And then, when the guy left through the back door, like he was fleeing from a crime, she told me that if I told Michael, she would make my life impossible, that it was my word against hers, that Michael would never believe me over her. And that's when something broke inside me. Like I literally felt it break. Because I realized my own mother was threatening me to protect her lie. She didn't even care that I'd caught her cheating on her husband. She only cared that I kept quiet. That night, I called my dad crying and told him everything. I didn't tell him about Mom's affair because at that moment, I didn't want to get into that drama. I just told him I needed to get out of that house, that I couldn't be there one more day. My dad came to pick me up the next day and told my mom I was going to live with him, and she didn't even fight for me. Literally just said something like, "Fine, you're almost an adult anyway," as if she was happy to get rid of me. Michael asked me why I was leaving, and I just told him I needed a change, that my dad lived closer to the university I wanted to go to. I made up any excuse because the truth is I felt bad for him. He was a good guy who didn't deserve to have a cheating wife. Living with my dad was the best thing that could have happened to me at that time. He had a 2-bedroom apartment that wasn't very big but was cozy, and for the first time in years I felt like someone actually cared about me. My dad helped me enroll in graphic design classes because I'd always been good at art. We cooked together, watched movies on weekends, all that corny father-daughter stuff that sounds cheesy but that I'd been missing for years. When I turned 18, my dad did something amazing. He bought me a small apartment as a combined birthday and graduation gift. A studio in a decent building in a quiet part of the city. The problem, and this is important, was that for legal reasons related to joint custody, that technically still applied until I turned 18. My mom's name had to appear on some initial paperwork, even though the apartment was completely mine and my dad paid for everything in cash. My dad explained it was just a temporary formality, that once all the final documents were processed, my mom wouldn't have any rights over the place, and I believed him because my dad would never lie to me. The apartment wasn't anything special, but it was mine. You know, my first own space, where I could do whatever I wanted without anyone bothering me. I rented it to a young couple because I decided to stay living with my dad a bit longer while I finished my design studies, and the rent money helped me pay for my things without depending completely on my dad. Everything was going well. I mean, as well as life can go when you basically have no relationship with your mom and your younger half-brother practically doesn't know you. Then my dad got sick. Lung cancer, stage 4, and the doctors told us he had maybe 6 months to live, possibly less. He was 58 years old, too young to die. But cancer doesn't care about those things. Those last months were the worst of my life, watching him deteriorate day by day, lose weight, lose his hair with chemo, lose the desire to do things he used to love. My mom showed up a couple times at the hospital, I guess to keep up appearances, but she didn't even stay long. She'd just come in, say some awkward words, and leave. When my dad died, I was 22 years old and felt like the only person in the world who truly loved me unconditionally had been ripped away. After the funeral, which was small and sad, I started organizing my dad's papers with the help of his lawyer, and we confirmed that the apartment was completely in my name now, with no legal connection to my mom. It was officially mine, paid in full, and it was basically the only valuable thing I had besides some savings my dad had left me. I decided to keep renting it because the income helped me, and also I didn't feel like moving there. That place reminded me too much of my dad, and I was still processing the grief. Like 3 years went by without having real contact with my mom. She'd send me messages occasionally for Daniel's birthday or Christmas, those obligatory things people do to not feel guilty, but I'd respond with monosyllables and wouldn't start conversations. Then, 2 years ago, she called me crying, saying she needed to talk to me urgently, that it was about Daniel. My half-brother was like 16 at that time and apparently had gotten a partial scholarship to a private university, but they needed to cover the rest of the tuition, which was pretty expensive, and my mom asked me if I could lend her money. I told her I didn't have that much cash available, which was true because even though the apartment generated income for me, I also had my own expenses. And also, I didn't trust her enough to lend her a large amount of money. She insisted, told me please, that it was for my little brother, that family helps each other, all that manipulative emotional speech people use when they want something from you. Finally, I told her I could help her with a small amount, but not to expect more, and I thought that would be the end of the conversation. How wrong I was. Like 2 months later, I get a call from the tenants of my apartment. A couple who had been living there for like a year and a half and always paid on time and took care of the place. The woman sounded super upset and told me they'd just received an eviction notice because the apartment had been sold and the new owner wanted them out in 30 days. I literally stood there with the phone in my hand thinking, what is she talking about? Because I hadn't sold any apartment. I hadn't even thought about selling it. I told her there must be a mistake, that I was the owner and hadn't sold anything, and she told me she had legal documents showing the sale had been completed 3 weeks ago. I felt like someone had thrown a bucket of ice water on me. I called the lawyer who had handled my dad's estate and explained the situation, and he told me he needed to see all the documents from the supposed sale immediately. The tenants sent me copies of the papers they'd been given, and when my lawyer reviewed them, he called me with news that basically made me feel like the floor was opening up beneath my feet. Someone had forged my signature on the sale documents, had used an ID that somehow passed the initial verifications, and had sold my apartment for like $180,000. Money that obviously never reached my bank account. I didn't need to be a detective to know who had done this. Only one person had access to my old documents where her name appeared. Only one person knew all the details about the apartment. Only one person had been desperate for money just a few months ago. My mom, Linda. The woman who gave birth to me and who apparently thought it was okay to steal the only valuable thing my dead father had left me. I went to her house without calling first, so furious I was literally shaking while driving. Michael opened the door and looked confused to see me there after so long without contact, and I asked him where my mom was. She came out of the kitchen with Daniel, who was already a tall, skinny teenager who barely recognized me, and I told her directly, "You sold my apartment, you forged my signature, and sold my damn apartment." The look on her face was of someone who didn't expect to be discovered so quickly, or maybe never, I don't know. But after a second of shock, she tried to deny it, told me I was crazy, that she didn't know what I was talking about. I showed her the documents I'd brought with me, the copies of the papers with the forged signature that clearly didn't match my real signature, and then she couldn't keep lying. Michael was standing there looking from me to her like he was trying to process what was happening, and my mom finally admitted that yes, she had sold the apartment, but that she'd done it for a good reason, that the money was for Daniel's education, that I had my job and could earn more money, but Daniel needed that opportunity to go to college, that any good sister would understand and make the sacrifice. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I screamed at her, and when I say screamed, I mean I literally screamed until my throat hurt. That apartment was mine, that my dad had given it to me, that she had no right to touch it, that she'd committed fraud and was going to jail for this. She started crying, because of course she started crying, and told me I was her daughter, that I couldn't do that to her, that family forgives and resolves things internally. Michael finally spoke and asked what the hell was going on, and I explained the whole situation to him while my mom kept crying and Daniel looked totally lost and scared. I left that house knowing exactly what I had to do. I hired a lawyer specialized in fraud, a good one who cost me a fortune from my savings but who knew what he was doing, and we filed a formal lawsuit against my mother for fraud, forgery of documents, and theft. The legal process was long and exhausting. We had to gather evidence, my real signature compared to the forged one, my bank statements showing I never received the money from the sale, testimonies from the tenants, a whole mountain of papers and court appearances. My mom hired her own lawyer who tried to argue it had been a misunderstanding, that she thought she had rights to the apartment because her name had been on the initial papers, basically any excuse they could invent to make her look less guilty. But the evidence was too clear. The signature forgery was obvious, and the fact that she'd never informed me or given me the money made it very clear she knew exactly what she was doing. The trial lasted like 6 months between hearings and postponements, and all the legal bureaucracy you can imagine. During that time, my mom tried to call me several times, sent me messages saying she was sorry, to please drop the lawsuit, that I was destroying the family, that Daniel hated me now for doing this to his mom. I blocked her number after the 10th message because I couldn't keep reading her manipulative attempts to make me feel guilty for defending myself from her crime. Finally, the judge handed down the sentence. Guilty of fraud and forgery of documents, 2 serious charges that in our state could carry prison time. My mom, Linda, 52 years old, was sentenced to 3 years in prison. 3 years. When I heard the verdict, I felt a weird mix of relief and sadness and also like emptiness, because on one hand, justice was being done, but on the other hand, it was my mom, you know, the woman who gave birth to me, and despite everything, a part of me still wanted her to be different, to be the mom I deserved to have. But it didn't end there. After the trial, I ran into Michael in the courthouse parking lot. He looked finished, 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him, and he asked me how everything had gotten to this point. And that's when I decided it was time to tell him the truth. The whole truth I'd kept for years. I told him about the time I caught my mom cheating on him when I was 17, told him about the guy who came out of their guest room, told him about the threat she'd made to keep me quiet. Michael's face completely crumbled. He asked me why I'd never told him, and I explained I was a scared teenager who didn't want to cause more problems, that by the time I had the courage to speak, years had passed, and I didn't. See the point in destroying his marriage with old information. But now, after everything she'd done, I felt he deserved to know who he'd really been married to all these years. Michael thanked me for telling him, though you could see he was devastated, and told me he was going to file for divorce, that he couldn't continue with someone capable of doing all this. Fast forward a few months, my mom is in prison serving her sentence. Michael filed the divorce papers, and from what I know, it's in process. Daniel apparently lives with Michael now and is at some university but with normal scholarships and student loans. I recovered the money from the apartment sale through the court judgment. Basically, they had to liquidate several of my mom's assets to return what was mine. And with that money, I bought a small house for myself, a new place without all the complicated memories of the apartment. Last week, Michael sent me a message asking how I was. Told me Daniel wanted to know if someday I could talk because he felt very confused about everything that happened. I responded that maybe in the future, but that right now I need time to process everything. The truth is, I don't know if I'll ever have a relationship with Daniel. He's not to blame for any of this, but he's tied to so many painful things that I don't know if I can separate that. My therapist, because yes, obviously, I'm in therapy after all this disaster, tells me it's normal to feel this mix of relief and guilt and sadness all at the same time. She asks me if I'll ever forgive my mom, and honestly, I don't know the answer. Part of me understands people do desperate things when they feel they have no options, but another part can't get over the fact that she stole something my dead father had given me, that she forged my signature, that she lied to my face, that she tried to manipulate me into feeling like I was the bad guy in the story for defending myself. Sometimes I wake up at night thinking about what my life I would have been like if my dad hadn't died, if he were still here to protect me from all this, and I feel like crying because I know he would have handled this much better than me, that he would have known what to say and what to do. Other times I feel proud of myself for having had the courage to sue my own mother, for not letting myself be stepped on, for fighting for what was mine, even though that meant destroying what little was left of our family relationship. I don't know what the moral of this story is, if there is one. I guess I learned that family doesn't always mean loyalty, that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you are the ones who hurt you the most, and that it's okay to set boundaries even when those people share your blood. My new house is small, but it's mine, completely mine, with no one else's names on the papers, no complicated stories attached. I have my plants, my workspace for my design projects, and a peace I hadn't felt in years, and I guess that has to be enough for now.